Charleston White just reported Young Thug to his probation officer. He claims Jeffrey Williams walked up on him at Drusky's event on federal property with an armed associate, made direct threats, and sealed his own fate. And a resurfaced 2-hour police interrogation tape from 2015 is about to make it impossible for Thug to play the victim. New evidence on the table, a probation officer already contacted, and the man who spent 2.5 years in pre-trial detention calling Gunna a rat now has his own interrogation tape going viral. This is the story of how Young Thug walked out of the longest RICO trial in Georgia history, and then allegedly walked straight into a confrontation that could send him back. Let's get into it. Charleston White is not bluffing, and based on what he dropped after that event, the internet has a right to be shaken right now. Here is what he said, directly, the moment he walked away from that confrontation. Right there. That is the entire thesis. Jeffrey Williams, Young Thug, is on probation. Not just regular probation, he is on 15 years of probation stemming from a guilty plea to 6 charges, including gang participation in RICO conspiracy, entered on October 31st, 2024, as part of the resolution to the YSL RICO case that consumed the Atlanta court system for the better part of 3 years. He was sentenced to 40 years, but that sentence was commuted to time already served, 2.5 years in pre-trial detention, and he walked out a free man under conditions that are specific, documented, and enforceable. Those conditions include no association with gang members, no new criminal charges, and a ban from Metro Atlanta for the first 10 years of his supervision. And Charleston White is standing in Miami, on or near federal property falling under the jurisdiction of the Federal Aviation Administration, claiming that Young Thug's crew just gave him everything he needs to get those conditions violated. So, here is the exact setup. Late March 2026, Young Thug and his entourage show up at Drusky's Coulda Been Love 2 reunion event in Miami. Now, Charleston White is also at this event, and understands something about these two men in the same room. This is not a chance encounter between strangers. Charleston White has been going at Young Thug, loudly and publicly, for close to a year. He has been calling him a rat, calling him a hypocrite, calling him everything short of a government indictment. So when he claims that Thug and his crew approached him aggressively, there is a pressure cooker of history behind that moment. This didn't just happen. This was a powder keg that had been soaking for months, and Miami was where it finally blew. According to White's account, again, given on camera, within hours before any lawyer could coach him, Thug's crew approached him and one associate, a heavyset man who White described in very specific physical detail, allegedly produced or appeared to produce a firearm. The alleged statement made in White's direction, according to his account, was something to the effect of, "You are going to lose your life right here." White says he pulled out mace, stood his ground, and refused to flinch. He is already constructing the legal argument as he speaks. He is not ranting. He is not spiraling. He is identifying the exact probation conditions that were allegedly violated in real time, on camera, with the clarity of someone who has been preparing for exactly this moment. And then, piece by piece, White laid out his next moves with a precision that is honestly more alarming than any amount of yelling could have been. He stated that he was going to contact Young Thug's probation officer first thing that Monday morning, that he was going to file a police report for what he described as terroristic threats, that he was going to seek a restraining order, that he was going to contact federal authorities, specifically citing the fact that the alleged confrontation occurred on FAA-regulated property, which transforms the jurisdictional calculus entirely, and that he was going to submit footage showing Young Thug in the company of individuals White described as active gang members, which, under Thug's current probation terms, is its own independent violation risk. That move, the restraining order, is the one that matters most strategically, and we are going to come back to exactly why in a moment. But first, understand the gravity of what White is saying in terms of Young Thug's current legal situation. This is a man who, as of March 31st, 2026, is still within the first 18 months of a 15-year probation agreement. The conditions of that agreement are not suggestions, they are court orders. And the Fulton County Superior Court, along with Fani Willis's office, has already attempted to have those conditions violated and revoked once before. They are not done watching. G. Charleston White knows this. He said it directly. There is something almost theatrical about that statement, swearing to tell the truth in the same cadence as a court oath. But the theater is the point. White is a former criminal justice student at Texas Wesleyan University. He is not stumbling through legal language by accident. He is performing the language of the system that he fully intends to deploy. And he is doing it on camera, so there is a timestamp, a record, and a documented chain of events that any probation officer or federal agent could pull up and review. Now let's talk about the new evidence, because the confrontation itself was only the match. The gasoline was everything Charleston White dropped after he left that event. In a follow-up video posted to social media in the hours that followed the confrontation, White went further than just describing what happened. He laid out step by step the procedural process that he claims was already in motion. He explained that the paperwork from his police report would need to travel through Miami's probation department, where Thug had apparently transferred his supervision after being banned from Metro Atlanta, and then make its way back to Fulton County, where a supervisor at the probation office would review it, confirm it, and potentially trigger a revocation hearing. White's argument was simple. The system is slow, but it is moving, and it is moving toward Jeffrey Williams. That sentence is the entire architecture of what Charleston White is doing here. Once he is scared, he goes to the authorities. He has said it 10,000 times, in 10,000 videos, and now he is saying it again in the immediate aftermath of an alleged threat on his life. There is no walking this back. There is no de-escalation. The fear, real or performed, has been declared on the record. He then went further still, explaining why the restraining order was his most powerful move, not the police report. Because the restraining order, once granted by a judge, creates a second independent front of legal exposure. If young Thug comes anywhere near Charleston White after a restraining order is in place, he is automatically in contempt of court. That is not a probation violation that requires the probation officer's discretion or the DA's initiative. That is a contempt charge that the court triggers on its own, and it is the kind of thing that Brian Steele, Thug's attorney, would have a much harder time fighting in a revocation hearing than a standard violation charge. As of March 31st, 2026, no confirmed charges have been filed and no official probation violation has been entered against young Thug. But White is adamant the paperwork is moving, and the conditions of Thug's probation, no gang associations, no new criminal activity, no Metro Atlanta for 10 years, place the alleged confrontation squarely in the legal crosshairs.
You are a gang leader.
That phrase is not accidental either. Under the terms of the YSL RICO guilty plea, young Thug pled no contest to leading a criminal street gang. Charleston White is not inventing a legal theory. He is quoting Thug's own plea back at him in the context of a fresh alleged confrontation. And that is the kind of argument that resonates in a revocation hearing. In 2015, there was a high-profile incident in Atlanta, a shooting at Lil Wayne's tour bus. Young Thug was voluntarily interviewed by Atlanta detectives about that incident. Not subpoenaed, not arrested, voluntarily. He sat down, he talked, and that conversation reportedly lasted close to 2 hours. In that interview, Thug named a YSL affiliate known as Pee Wee Roscoe, real name Jimmy Winfrey, in connection with selling weed to Lil Wayne and having some knowledge related to the incident surrounding the shooting. He also reportedly provided his phone number to the detectives and invited further conversation. Now hold that in your mind. Young Thug, the same man who publicly dragged Gunna for his Alford plea in the YSL RICO case, the same man who put out a diss track titled Closing Arguments, calling people rats, and writing Death Before Dishonor all across it, voluntarily sat down with Atlanta police and named an associate in a recorded 2-hour conversation with detectives. Without a subpoena, without legal compulsion of any kind. That is the tape. That is what exists. This audio had reportedly circulated as early as 2023, but it exploded with massive new viral energy in August 2025, spreading across social media platforms at a scale that made it impossible to ignore. And that August surge was precisely when Charleston White locked in and went to full battle stations. White's framing of this entire story is a courtroom, with himself as the judge, Thug as the defendant, and the 2015 audio as Exhibit A. He has categorized the interrogation as a clear case of what the culture calls dry snitching, where you do not testify under oath or provide formal written cooperation, but you sit down with police and volunteer enough information about an associate in a recorded setting that it could compromise that person in a future investigation. And in hip-hop's unwritten code of conduct, that is enough. That is more than enough. But the 2015 tape was only the beginning of the problem, because then the YSL Ryko case happened, and that is where everything turned truly ugly. On May 9, 2022, Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis's office dropped a 56-count RICO indictment against Young Thug and 27 co-defendants, charging them all with conspiracy under Georgia's RICO statute. The central allegation was that YSL, which Thug had always publicly maintained stood for Young Stoner Life and was purely a record label, was in reality a Bloods-affiliated criminal street gang called Young Slime Life, responsible for murders, armed robberies, drug distribution, and a sustained pattern of organized criminal activity dating back to approximately 2012. The indictment laid out 191 separate overt acts in support of the conspiracy charges, ranging from actual shootings and documented drug sales, all the way to rap lyrics, social media posts, and hand signs in music videos. The trial that followed became the longest criminal trial in Georgia history. Jury selection alone consumed nearly 10 months. There were 2 separate judge recusals, attorney contempt hearings, a defendant who was stabbed in jail, and enough courtroom chaos to fill a limited series. And through all of that, in December 2022, Gunna, real name Sergio Kitchens, quietly took an offered plea to 1 count of RICO conspiracy. He acknowledged that sufficient evidence existed to convict him, served the time he had already accumulated in pretrial detention, and walked free with 500 hours of community service and probation. He did not testify against a single co-defendant. Young Thug went absolutely in on Gunna for it. Publicly, loudly, and with obvious delight, he amplified the rat label that was being placed on Gunna by corners of the internet. He made his death before dishonor identity the central pillar of his public brand during the trial. Every move he made was saying, "I am the man who didn't fold. I am the standard. I am what loyalty looks like." Then, on October 31st, 2024, Young Thug entered a guilty plea of his own to 6 charges, including gang participation, drug possession, and firearm counts. He entered a no-contest plea to additional charges, including leading a criminal street gang and RICO conspiracy. His sentence, 40 years, commuted entirely to time already served, 15 years of probation, banned from Metro Atlanta for the first decade of supervision, released immediately. Charleston White's question, the one he has been screaming from every platform available to him, is devastatingly simple. What exactly is the difference? That right there is the Charleston White disarmament strategy in real time. Before anyone can call him a hypocrite, he calls himself one first. He was convicted of first-degree murder as a juvenile in Tarrant County, Texas, one of the youngest defendants ever convicted of that charge in the county's history. He served approximately 7 years in juvenile detention and has publicly acknowledged, on many occasions, that he cooperated with authorities during that period. He has never run from it. He weaponizes it. The logic goes, if you try to call me a snitch, I agree. I already said it. Now let's talk about you. His point about Thug is surgical in its precision. Thug refuses to own what White claims the evidence shows. Thug calls everyone else a rat while the 2015 tape exists. That perceived hypocrisy is what Charleston White has made his entire mission to document and expose, and it is landing with considerably more weight now that an in-person confrontation has made this story physical and immediate. Beyond the 2015 audio, White has also claimed possession of court documents from the YSL RICO proceedings that reference Young Thug allegedly making statements to police while in the back of a police car at approximately 17 years old, in connection with a separate murder-related investigation. This is not the same as the 2015 Lil Wayne tour bus interrogation. This is an entirely different earlier incident. The important nuance here: Thug's defense team actively disputed this claim during the RICO trial itself, filing legal motions arguing that the detective involved had fundamentally misrepresented what was actually said in that police car. The paperwork White cites is technically a defense motion, a filing designed to deny the snitching claim, not confirm it. White's interpretation, however, is that the conversation happened at all. In his framework, the content of what was said matters less than the fact that the documented exchange with police occurred. Then there are the leaked jail calls. GQ reported on a series of recorded phone calls from Thug's time in custody during the RICO proceedings, calls that surfaced around the same time as the 2015 audio, in which he spoke candidly about industry figures, personal matters, co-defendants, and the state of the case. None of these calls constitute formal testimony or legal cooperation in any traditional courtroom sense, but the optics of an incarcerated man talking freely about peers, about his RICO case, and about associates on recorded jail phones that every person in custody is informed are being monitored is not a clean look under any credibility framework, legal or cultural. And then came the most damaging voice of all: not White, not an internet personality, but someone who was inside the organization itself. YSL co-founder Mondo publicly called young Thug the biggest rat and suggested that Thug was personally responsible for drawing the RICO investigation's original attention to the enterprise. That claim remains unverified by any publicly available court documents, but the fact that it came from someone who helped build YSL alongside Thug, that is the kind of accusation that leaves a mark that no diss track erases. Now, Thug has not been silent. He pushed back on all of it. He posted on X that the 2015 interrogation tape was never introduced as evidence against him in the RICO trial, specifically because it showed him helping his associate, his brada, not harming them. He called his mention of the weed sale an honest mistake, made in the context of demonstrating that there was no beef between his camp and Lil Wayne's. He shared a court motion as evidence that the detective involved had lied. He dropped closing arguments, naming Gunna, Woody, Yak Gotti, and others as the real rats. He planted his flag, and Pee Wee Roscoe, the very man whose name appeared in the 2015 interrogation recording, actually came out publicly in Thug's defense. He said Thug was clean as Listerine from a snitching standpoint, and that what was captured in the recording was the exact kind of non-committal, deflective conversation that happens in interrogation rooms, the kind of talking that does not cross into real betrayal. That is not an insignificant statement. The person who was allegedly named is saying he was not harmed by what was said. But here is where we land in the court of public opinion. The tape is the tape. The jail calls are the jail calls. The RICO plea is the plea. And Charleston White is at his probation officer's office first thing Monday morning. All of Thug's defenses live in the nuance. And the internet, especially an internet that just watched a video of White describing a confrontation with armed associates at a Miami event, has very little patience for nuance right now. DJ Academics is not a man known for sugarcoating. And when the story of the Drusky confrontation broke, he delivered what can only be described as a public letter to young Thug that was equal parts warning and eulogy for a second chance being potentially squandered. "We felt bad for you the first time." That qualifier is carrying everything. The first time was the arrest in May 2022. The first time was 2.5 years of pretrial detention in Fulton County, held without bond while the most complicated and expensive criminal trial in Georgia history slowly assembled itself around him. The first time was watching a man whose talent and influence were undeniable get swallowed by a case that most people expected would put him away for decades. And then watching him walk out on what academics describes as one of the most lenient outcomes ever delivered in a case of this scope: murder conspiracy charges, RICO, gang leadership, and receive time served with 15 years of probation. The goodwill from the first time? According to academics, it is gone. The benefit of the doubt has been withdrawn, and the reason is not the confrontation with White specifically, it is the pattern that led to it. Academics, who was in Miami during this period by his own account, spoke to what he observed directly. Young Thug and Lil Baby had been moving through Miami together, visibly, loudly, in the kind of company and with the kind of energy that is precisely what probation officers flag. Condo thugging. That phrase does a lot of work in very few words. It is academics describing the specific phenomenon of men performing gangster energy, running down on people, keeping aggressive company, projecting the street image, from the comfort of luxury real estate, as if the address makes the behavior invisible to the system. It does not, particularly not when you are on probation, particularly not when your probation has already been the subject of revocation attempts, particularly not when the man you allegedly just threatened is already on the phone with his attorney and your probation officer. The message academics was delivering was not hateful. It was almost tender in its frustration. You were given a second lease on life. The judge commuted 40 years to time served. You walked out of that courtroom a free man when the math said you shouldn't have. Please, don't make this story end the way it doesn't have to end. No tears. That is academics stepping fully back and washing his hands of the outcome, not from a place of malice, but from the exhausted clarity of someone who has issued the warning and watched it go unheeded. And the timing of that clip, delivered just days before the alleged confrontation with White at Drusky's event, gives it a prescience that is genuinely unsettling in retrospect. If academics was the exasperated media figure delivering a Big Brother warning, Rollo was the Atlanta voice delivering raw, unfiltered street logic with zero patience and zero sympathy. And his take on the Drusky confrontation was the most brutal assessment to come from anyone in Thug's proximity. Rollo's history with young Thug is its own complicated chapter. They have exchanged accusations and counter-accusations on social media for years, and there is no love lost between them. So, when Rollo weighed in on this situation, it was not from a place of concern for Jeffrey Williams' freedom, but the substance of what he said. It is the most accurate thing anyone said about this entire situation. His argument was this: only a man with absolutely no self-preservation instinct approaches Charleston White while on probation from a RICO case. Because Charleston White is not ambiguous about who he is or what he does, this is not a man with hidden intentions. He has stated, on camera, in hundreds of videos across multiple platforms and years, that he will call the police, that he will contact probation officers, that he will file reports and seek restraining orders and use every tool the legal system makes available to him, without apology, without shame, and with the defiant posture of a man who has already admitted he is exactly what street culture says he is. He is not a wolf in sheep's clothing. He is a wolf in full wolf regalia, carrying a sign that reads, "I am the wolf," and young Thug allegedly still walked up to him and made threats. Rollo posted that wise men don't start fights that they can't win, and that only a fool would publicly confront Charleston White. The troll energy in the delivery is obvious, but the truth underneath it is not trolling at all. You cannot square up with someone who fights with subpoenas and probation violation reports filed in Fulton County Superior Court. That is a fight with a predetermined outcome, and the outcome doesn't care how much street credibility you have built. What makes Rollo's commentary land the hardest is not what he said about Thug's judgment. It is the reason he gave for not wanting Thug to go back to prison. It was not loyalty. It was not respect. He said he didn't want Thug sent back because he would lose his trolling material. Let that sit with you for a moment. The most prominent voice in this story's early hours saying, "Please don't send him to jail," was doing so because he finds the situation entertaining. That is the level of seriousness with which people in Thug's orbit are treating his post-RICO decision-making. Charleston White leans into the irony of his own positioning relentlessly. He is the man who openly admits to snitching, who is now using his admitted cooperation history as the basis for his credibility in calling someone else a hypocrite for doing the same thing less honestly. The circularity of it would be almost funny if the stakes weren't real. And for young thug on probation, with conditions that are actively under challenge, the stakes are about as real as they get. White also raised the specific point about Brian Steele, Thug's attorney who navigated him through one of the most complex criminal trials in the country, arguing that Steele's success in the RICO trial does not translate to strength in a probation revocation context. The revocation hearing is a different arena. The burden of proof is lower, the discretion of the court is wider, and Steele hasn't faced an opponent like this specific situation. A self-documenting, publicly vocal man who has filed police reports, submitted footage, and is actively seeking a restraining order. All of it time-stamped and on the internet for any judge or probation supervisor to pull up in 30 seconds. Here is where we have to take the widest possible view, because this story is ultimately not about a party in Miami or a beef on social media. It is about legacy. And in hip-hop, legacy is the most fragile and most permanent thing a person can build simultaneously. Young Thug, Jeffrey Lamar Williams, is genuinely one of the most innovative and transformative voices in the history of Atlanta rap. His albums, Barter 6, Jeffrey, So Much Fun, Punk, helped define the sonic identity of a generation. His melodic approach to rap, his destruction of genre walls, his slime language, and deliberately eccentric personal aesthetic. These things did not just influence Future, Lil Baby, and Gunna. They fundamentally reshaped the vocabulary of Southern rap, and by extension, what mainstream hip-hop sounded like to the rest of the world. That contribution is documented. It is permanent. Nobody is taking it. But the credibility narrative and the death before dishonor positioning, the public destruction of Gunna's reputation, the construction of himself as the last man standing in the YSL saga who didn't bend. That narrative is under a level of sustained assault it has never faced before. And the 2015 interrogation tape is the single most effective instrument of that assault. Not because it constitutes legal proof of formal cooperation, but because it documents the one thing that hip-hop culture finds truly unforgivable: the specific hypocrisy of calling others rats, while your own recorded conversations with police are sitting in a file somewhere. Thug has issued his defense. He posted that the tape was never introduced as evidence against him in the RICO trial because it showed him helping his associate, not harming them. He framed mentioning the weed sale as an innocent mistake made to demonstrate the absence of beef. He shared court filings to argue a detective lied. He dropped closing arguments and named names. He did everything you do when you are fighting back. But then he allegedly went to a Drusky event and approached Charleston White with a crew. And that crew allegedly had a weapon, and alleged threats were made, and now that alleged confrontation is sitting in the hands of a probation officer in Miami, waiting to be transmitted to Fulton County. White's courtroom performance, the bit where he plays judge and finds the entire arc of this story hilarious, contains within it the fundamental paradox that has defined this saga from the beginning. The man who built his public brand on YSL is just a record label, and I Refuse to Fold ultimately entered a plea that included no contest to leading a criminal street gang. He is now on 15 years of probation. He is banned from his own city for a decade, and he is allegedly still, as of late March 2026, incapable of letting a beef go, even when letting it go is the only rational move available to a man in his legal position. The irony that White is pointing at is not complicated, it is just painful.